Recording. Hey everybody, Matt with Freestand here. Got a special guest on the show today, Kirsten Screen. She is a dietitian. And where are you based? I meant to ask.
Yeah, so I am actually just south of Charlotte. So I always say I'm in North Carolina, but I'm not. I'm technically in South Carolina, but greater Charlotte area.
Greater Charlotte area.
Yeah,
I'm in Brooklyn, by the way. So
nice.
nice to connect and thank you for coming on.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So yeah, we could just dive right into it. Kirsten, if you could give like a little background to kind of how you got started, and kind of what led to where you are now in terms of becoming a dietitian, that would be awesome.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So I have been a dietitian for quite some time, actually. I got into this industry probably about 20 years ago. Studied my undergrad in nutrition. I have a master's in public health. I've worked in nutrition since then, but in different capacities. I've been in corporate wellness. I have been in private practice. I've worked a little bit in clinical. I always knew eventually I wanted to be exclusive in my private practice. So that's what I do now. What kind of got me here is a very long and winding road of all of those other stops. And, then I had a bunch of kids in the way, and not in the way, but on the path, I should say. Edit that for the kids. Love you, mean it. But, kind of derailed a little bit on there, and then did some other things, but always knew this is where I was going to end up in the end. So that's how I ended up kind of here in private practice. I've been doing that for probably about the last 4 years now.
Very cool. And so you were doing corporate first, right?
Yeah.
And then clinical?
Yes.
So
well, actually I did clinical first, clinical for a few years, and then corporate.
Okay, so let's start with that then. So what is clinical like, I guess, compared to everything else?
Yeah, great question. And most people probably don't really know what a dietitian does because people hear nutritionist. And I always say all dietitians are nutritionists. Not all nutritionists are dietitians. So we are nationally governed. We have to have a 4-year degree. We have to everybody has to have a master's degree. We have to pass a national board exam. We have to do a clinical internship. So we have to be in a hospital setting and have all of that. So what a clinical dietitian does is every disease state you can think of is impacted by nutrition, right? We all eat. So there's always that component. So a clinical dietitian would be in a hospital setting. You might deal with diabetic patients. You might deal with someone in an acute care setting who just had a stroke or a heart attack, or you might be dealing with a delivering mother. You might be dealing with any situation that you find in a hospital. You will probably see the dietitian if you're there for more than a day or two.
Got it. Okay. And was this all inpatient or also outpatient as well?
So yeah, great question. Sometimes it's a combination of both. Most of what I saw was inpatient, but every so often you'll have an outpatient. So a person who is, for example, a diabetic who was initially an acute care patient who then comes back for follow-up visits and such, especially when it's a chronic kind of situation, a lifetime situation like diabetes and the like.
Got it. And what was it, mostly diabetics that you would see?
It was.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, like, what was kind of like the different scenarios that you would see where, the same types of patients would need a dietitian?
Great question. It's pretty much everything that you can think of. So yes, diabetics, that's a frequent one just because it's a common condition, especially in our current sort of Western diet. We call the American diet the SAD diet, the standard American diet. It is the SAD diet because it leads to all of these issues, right? Metabolic issues. So a lot of diabetes. Again, you see a lot of stroke, a lot of cardiac disease. You also sometimes see folks in an acute care setting where the nurse or the doctor may diagnose this person as malnourished for things that have nothing to do with their current reason for being admitted, but they just may generally be malnourished. So then while they're here in the hospital, we're going to also deal with the dietitian. Also, and folks don't think of this, especially with COVID right now, this is kind of relevant. Anybody who is on a ventilator has to be fed. So those feeding calculations are done by the dietitian. So whether that's a tube feeding, anything that's done with a tube feeding, that's the dietitian. Or if we can't feed orally, we do what's called total parenteral nutrition. So then we feed through a vein. And all of that is generally calculated by a clinical dietitian as well.
Got it. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So that's really important to distinguish for people. It's the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist.
Yes.
And I spoke with one other person who was a dietitian, and she explained it to me, and I didn't really know.
Right.
So a dietitian gets a 4-year degree. You work in at minimum plus a master's, and you work in a hospital. You're doing like real things that could like life altering work. Essentially,
yes.
If you're
board qualified, certified, registered health professional. We are governed by every state by the same medical board that governs, other healthcare professionals. Where a nutritionist, in theory, you can get a weekend seminar and be a nutritionist. So you want to make sure you're picking the right person for the right purpose.
Yeah, it's like, I think it's kind of like the same thing as like a mental health counselor and therapist versus like a psychologist,
A
essentially,
psychiatrist, yeah.
or psychiatrist, either one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to distinguish that. So then, okay, so that's very interesting. Did you ever have any people that were like bulimic and stuff like that would need to see you?
Some I did in my clinical rotations when I was doing my clinical internship. I did have an eating disorder rotation. It's a very stressful space to be in for everyone, for the patients, for everybody. And in that setting, it's most absolutely a complete care team. It is not just the dietitian. There's counselors involved. There's therapists involved. There's a medical director involved as well, because a lot of times that's a life-threatening or close to life-threatening situation. So, yeah.
Got it. I was just curious about that one. So, and okay, moving forward. So first it was clinical and then corporate. What was corporate?
Yes. Corporate. So corporate wellness, which has sort of in the last 20 years, I would say, kind of become a thing. And anybody who works in a large corporation probably has it to some degree. We're talking things like health fairs, health checks, weight management clinics at your workspace, fitness facilities at your workspace. So I was in Florida at the time, and I worked for one of the largest power utilities in the country. And I managed their corporate wellness program, the health promotion piece of their corporate wellness program. So we had a lot of fitness facilities throughout all of their locations, but we did a lot of health intervention. It's more group programming as opposed to individual care like a hospital setting.
Got it. Yeah. And I think that's honestly something that's becoming more and more prevalent today. Like, especially with all like these tech companies with all these crazy benefits and stuff. And I think that, and then also mental health awareness and kind of like destigmatizing that. And I know that they're offering that in the workplace as well, which is interesting.
Absolutely. Great resources. Cause a healthier employee and a happier employee.
A lot
of times,
Oh, you're back. You cut out for like 2 seconds.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was saying that.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Sorry. I was saying that a healthier employee and a happier employee is a more productive employee. And, it usually keeps healthcare costs lower for the employer. So it's kind of a win-win. There's not a downside to it.
Great. Alrighty. So moving forward, so first clinical, then corporate, and then this is 4 years ago you started your private practice?
Sort of, yes. I had a private practice a while ago, but then I had a bunch of kids. So that kind of took priority. My husband has a pretty busy job. So we had a bunch of kids. I made the decision to kind of take a step back from my career and hang out with them and make sure that, they were being raised. That's important.
Of course.
Didn't want to throw them to the wolves. And then my husband actually had a company that we built together. So kind of did a lot of that. But I would say 4 years ago, I kind of seriously started setting up my private practice to where it is today.
That's awesome. And so I guess you're in North Carolina, right?
Well, technically, yes, just south of, but yes.
Okay. But you're right on the border of South Carolina, North Carolina?
Yep. Charlotte is pretty much right at the state line.
Got it. So you opened up an office? Like, how did you start? Did you open up an office, or were you working out of your house? Kind of like, what was the
Great question. There? So I never had a brick and mortar for my business because it's not necessary. So a lot of what I was doing was telehealth, through the setting from the very beginning. And with some folks that I knew locally, we would meet local, whether that was, at a coffee shop or at a park or at the person's home.
Right.
Because a lot of times nutrition happens, happens in your home. It happens in your kitchen. So a lot of times we had meetings there for folks that were local to my area, but for everyone else, it's been telehealth from the start.
That's very interesting. So you would meet with people in their house. So you would show up and like go through their fridge and talk to them about everything.
I mean, sometimes that's part of what we do. Yeah. A lot of folks think that that's all we do as a dietitian, that we're going to tell you exactly what to eat. That's actually, I don't tell anyone what foods to eat. I've never done that. I never will. But that would be part of what I did. Yes. When I saw them in their home.
Got it. Yeah. That's interesting. And in terms of what you do and kind of your approach, what is your approach? Because this space in general, I feel like, is one of the most kind of like just so many different opinions, right? With healthy diet and million books, and especially with the internet now. What is your approach to guiding somebody to live like a healthy lifestyle and like everything that you teach and preach, I guess?
Yeah, great question. And the perfect thing, you just said it. There's so many opinions. That's the beautiful thing about dietitians. We don't go on opinions, we go on science.
Right.
That's
Right.
probably the biggest difference. So everything we do as dietitians is evidence-based. If there's not research to back up that this makes sense, then that's not what we preach. That does not mean we don't individualize for people. 100% we do. But everything I do is based on, here's what we know from the science, here's what we know in the research, here's what we know in actual everyday best practices. That's what we go with. So when I coach folks, and I deal mostly with an active population, I don't deal with acute illness. That's because I'm in private practice. That's not my current bag. That's not what I want to deal with. So I see folks who are generally healthy. They may have an underlying health condition, but that's not why they come to see me. They come to see me because, again, I work with an active population, usually for performance goals or to support an active lifestyle, to just be able to manage their daily life, right? A lot of times it's moms that are now super busy, that don't have time, that, need to figure out how do they support themselves while supporting a whole family. And I deal with a lot of athletes. So I have folks that want to train for an Ironman, or folks that want to run the Boston Marathon, folks that really truly need to support a very energy dependent activity. And they want to get through that training cycle. So when I meet with them, it's based on, here's what the science says, but let's incorporate that into your life and make sure it works for you. So it's a very individualized approach.
And was that something specific that you wanted to do, is work with people who already had healthy lifestyles and kind of focus on that niche and work with athletes and, like mothers and people like that specifically?
Yes. And actually, that's how I got into dietetics to begin with. I was a student athlete myself in high school, and I had a terrible coach who gave terrible nutrition advice because
I've
it
had
wasn't
terrible
within
coaches
his,
as well.
we all
I'll,
have, I think. It's awful.
I'll tell you a funny story quickly. So I had this
Yeah.
coach, and I played hockey. That was like my main sport. And we were in the state final championships, and we were in double overtime. And my coach came in and he was like, "Guys, like I got some snacks for you. And you need some energy." And he went to the vending machine. He got Hershey bars, and he's giving out the Hershey bars, and we're eating these in our mouth. We're like dry, or we're exhausted, and like anyway. But
Yeah.
that's my quick story. Go ahead.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because that probably wasn't super helpful to your process.
We
Mine was
lost.
similar.
We lost.
Yeah, I believe it. And you probably weren't happy about it.
Mm-mm.
I was a track runner in high school, and I had a coach who gave terrible advice, who told all the female track runners that we were too fat and we were too slow and we didn't, give
Jesus.
any effort. And he basically told us all to lose 10 pounds. And, a bunch of people starved themselves. A bunch of people did things, and everybody got injured. And I quit track because it was awful. And I just kind of figured there's got to be a better way to do this. And I had, up until that point, I always wanted to be a surgeon. That was kind of what I had in the back of my head. And something clicked that made me realize I don't really want to fix people that are already sick. I kind of want to figure out, how do I keep people from getting there to begin with?
Right.
And we do that through food, because every single thing we do and every is dependent on what we feed it. Every, metabolic process that's currently happening with you sitting there and me talking here, all of these things are related to our nutritional intake. So it's kind of what got me started. So yeah, I kind of always knew I wanted to work with people that were more about, how do I stay healthy? How do I, at age 85, still have an active, independent lifestyle? Like sometimes they're hardcore athletes and we're talking about Ironman races, and these are dedicated, hardcore people, right? But sometimes it's a 38-year-old mother of 3 who just wants to make sure she's got energy to not have to take a nap with the 3-year-old at 3 p.m., right? She just wants to get through her day. So I've kind of always wanted to work with that population, because most of us have room for improvement there.
Very cool. And what is your approach as a dietitian with these types of people?
Yeah. And there's so much stuff on the internet where everyone says, you got to cut stuff out. You got to do this, that. My approach is all foods are meant to be eaten. Some we eat for joy. Some we eat for health. We have a daily budget and we just make that budget work. And sometimes you spend all your money on shoes and sometimes you pay all the mortgage. You just kind of got to make it work. So my approach is always, it's led by the client. I am here as your co-pilot. I take you on the road and I give you directions. But if you don't like the road we're driving on, then we get on a different road, because it doesn't have to work in my textbook. It has to work in your life. Right. So my approach is we work together. We set very small goals. I meet with these folks initially weekly, and then we kind of space it out over time as they get more confidence and they have all their foundations in place. And it's long-term coaching. I don't see anybody for just 1 or 2 sessions. Most of my people are with me somewhere between 6 and 12 months.
Oh, wow.
because they see progress, and it takes a while to change behaviors. And a lot of times we've done something a certain way for 40 years. We're
Right.
not going to fix it in 40 minutes. It's not going to happen. And the body needs time. The body needs time for whether it's, body composition and we're trying to lose some fat and gain some muscle, or we are trying to train for a major event, or we have been sedentary and just not feeling well and we need to get to the other side of that. It just takes time. So it's a
Yeah.
long-term approach, small, steady, incremental goals every single week. And we kind of go from there.
Yeah. I think the small goals thing is, I think you froze up again. You're back. But I think the small goals thing is like the most important. Have you ever read that book, Atomic Habits?
I have heard of it. I've never read it myself, but yeah, I
It's
know, I'm familiar with the concept.
Yeah, it's really good. Essentially, they just say like if you can set small goals and you can kind
Mm-hmm.
of get that reward system quickly,
Yep.
kind of triggers your head to like, oh, I could do that again and again and again, and then slowly ramp up, which is
That's what we do. We always make sure that we set each other up. We set the client up for success every week. We
right.
don't set goals that are unattainable, because then it's like nobody wants to fail on purpose, right?
Yeah,
So we set up goals that are achievable. We can knock those out and we can kind of bank those wins. And like you just said, more wins we bank, the easier the road becomes.
exactly. Because then the client becomes like obsessed with winning
Mm-hmm.
because they
Yeah.
win all these little wins.
Yeah. And
Um,
they feel better. And that's the goal, right?
right. In terms of like, I know you don't have like a specific playbook for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
but in terms of like the types of foods that you recommend to people, just listening for
Yeah.
myself here.
Yeah, I don't actually. So here's what I tell people. We look for balanced intake. I don't ever say you need to eat these foods.
Hmm.
And a good dietitian won't, because here's what I'll tell you. You can eat whatever food you want to eat, you can eat. You can have bacon if you want. Can you have bacon every day and live a healthy lifestyle? No. And you know that, right? Like,
Yeah.
so sometimes it's specific, sometimes it's general. It is all about how do we make sure we're meeting my philosophy, and my goal for everyone is always low stress, high nourishment. Where do we find that happy place where we're giving your body as much nutrition as we can? We're looking for all the opportunities to add. I don't like taking away. I like to add. If we add enough of the right things, we crowd out enough of the things we shouldn't have so often, and it all comes out in the wash. So we add
Gotcha.
nourishment and we keep the stress low. The second food becomes a task, or it becomes a daily, wait, that's on my list of no eat foods, we fail, because that's a horrible approach. It doesn't work. Nobody wants to live that way. I also
Right.
don't do straight up macro tracking. I don't think that's useful for anyone.
Too specific.
It gets too specific. It gets some people to a specific goal at a certain time, but then what do you learn in that process? How do you eat moving forward? Are you going to travel the rest of your life with a food scale under your arm? Like, it's not
Right.
realistic.
Right.
So I don't take that approach usually.
Unless you're like diabetic and you really need it or something.
Even for a
Actually,
diabetic, I don't do that.
oh yeah. I wonder about that approach because like, and I agree with you, but my cousin is diabetic and he
Mm-hmm.
carries around a scale. He's also just kind of like that with everything.
Yeah.
But I was always kind of wondering how like other
So for a
diabetics dealt
diabetic,
with it.
yeah, we definitely look at portions and we make sure we have consistent carbohydrate intake, but I prefer to teach folks how to eyeball everything that they
Right.
do, which comes with time and practice. If he succeeds with that, good for him, more power to him. For most of my people, that will become very exhaustive after a short period of time, and you
Yeah.
can generally control diabetes with just eyeballing what you're doing.
Yeah. You need to know the basics obviously first and learn it, and then you can probably just glance.
But and you also need basics, but you need to be very specific about your basics. Diabetes is a different beast. I don't deal with a whole lot of diabetics. I have a few with me right now, diabetic athletes, and we always incorporate that. But for somebody who truly is starting out with understanding their diabetes, they probably want to start with a clinical dietitian because it has to be very specific to start.
Gotcha. Is there such thing as a sugar rush? Or is that a myth?
Yeah, no, sugar rush is a real thing, because when sugar hits your blood, your body responds. Sugar is the only thing your body lives on. So all these folks who are like, you have to cut out all sugar. First of all, that would mean all fruits, all vegetables, all dairy, nuts technically, because there's some in there, definitely all grains. Like, you're left with straight up meat and straight up fat. That's the only thing in our diet that does not contain some type of sugar. And guess what your body does with that? It converts it to a sugar, because that's the only thing your brain can effectively use.
Mm-hmm.
So you're making life really hard for your body. So yes, there's such a thing as a sugar rush. It's supposed to be there because it means your body's being flooded with the resources to create ATP, which is our energy system, which is what we need. Again, your brain only wants to function on carbohydrates. It can survive on ketones. It does not want to. It's a starvation state. Your brain does not want to do that. It's not going to function at capacity. the point is when that sugar rush happens, you get an insulin rush, which then has that, that downside of suddenly you feel super sluggish, not because anything's wrong or because you broke anything, but because that's what's supposed to happen. So I always prefer, and this is what we teach people in coaching, we want a steady, balanced intake. We want your sugar to kind of stay here and not do this, right?
Got it. So just don't eat tons of it at once, just steady throughout the day. Right.
Yeah. And also make sure you balance it with other foods. There are other things in our diet besides straight up sugar. So we just have to balance our intake. But yeah, you can have all your Easter candy and still be totally fine.
Okay. Yeah, just curious. My roommate and I were talking about that the other day. In terms of dieting and kind of the whole space in general, has it changed at all in your opinion? Because, like at least when I was, in high school, even still, they would have like the pyramid with the fish on the top and like, that old school kind of method. Has anything changed generally in the space, do you think, or is
So here's what I would say to people. The human metabolism, the way it functions, never changes.
Right.
Even though everyone always wants to have the new big thing on, this is the trick to fixing all your problems. Science doesn't change, right? The way the human body metabolizes food doesn't change. The chemical reactions are always the same. Everyone always is looking for a shortcut. So to answer the question about have we changed from the food pyramid to, a balanced plate approach to, the guidelines that are pushed out by the government, yeah, that stuff changes, but it's just a rewrapping of the same idea because again, the way we approach nutrition is no different. The problem is the public is always looking for that magic bullet, and there just isn't one. The magic bullet is a super simple thing. Here, for all your listeners, here's the magic bullet: consistency over time.
Right.
And nobody wants that because everyone wants to have their cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
Quick. And here's the other thing: quick weight loss, you're going to gain all that back. Quick weight loss is never lasting. You're going to lose it. You're going to gain it. You're going to lose it. You're going to gain it. You want slow and steady, and you want consistency over time.
Yeah. That's why dieting just doesn't work, like fad diets and stuff. Yeah.
Does not. Absolutely. Fat diets do not work, which by the way, I'm actually doing today I'm doing a Facebook Live on that in my private Facebook group about why clean eating is going to kill your long-term goals. So
let's first of all, I think you should write a book. Second of all, let's talk about let's talk about the Facebook group. And I know you got to jump at 12:15, so we'll keep it short.
Yes, sir. Okay, so Facebook group, I have a private Facebook group free to anyone, not just clients. If you look it up on Facebook, it is YFD Nutrition Coaching. YFD stands for Your Fitness Dietitian. So YFD Nutrition Coaching. It's free to anyone. You just click to join. I do weekly lives in there. I also provide other resources. People ask questions in there. There's a lot of community support, so anyone's free to join that. The lives vary from week to week, but I generally kind of pick a theme of things that I'm seeing either with clients or in my Instagram community, which if you want to find me on Instagram, it's at Your Fitness Dietitian. Yep. So I'll see common threads of things that people have questions about, and I try to address those in the Facebook group.
That's awesome. And how many people are in that Facebook group?
I just started it fairly recently. We're hovering somewhere around 220, I think.
220? Oh, that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so in terms of how many clients that you work with on a regular basis, and are they all one-on-one clients?
Yes, great question.
Yeah.
Everything I do is one-on-one coaching because that's how we move the needle, right? So group coaching, I'm not a huge fan of because it's not individual, and your life and your nutrition's individual. So I can give general resources in groups, which is again what's in the Facebook group, but for all of my clients, they're one-on-one. I try to kind of keep a capacity for my personal clients at about 30 because it's a lot of value that I try to provide. So once we kind of get past that, I feel like the time gets tight, right? There's only so many hours in a day. So I do actually have a wait list in place, but if anyone wants to hop on that, generally wait is like 2 to 3 weeks until people offboard. Sometimes we have to kind of play with that. But if anyone's interested to get on that wait list, again, you can contact me through the Facebook group or through Instagram or the website, which is yourfitnessdietitian.com. Probably going to be expanding to a co-coach here in the next couple of months to kind of take some of that overflow. So the goal is always to get folks in one-on-one. And like I said, initially we meet weekly, and then we kind of, after a month or so, start spacing it out as folks get more comfortable, and we just have to let time do its thing.
Gotcha. And in terms of you, it sounds like you have a steady flow of clients. Well, actually, no, first question is, how much does it cost to work with you?
Great question. And that depends because we can't determine until I talk to that person how long we're going to need to work together. So I always tell folks, you have to think of it as an investment in your health. And in the end, it should cost you nothing. Because if you think of what it's costing you not to take this action, or to do all of these other programs that are not going to get you to your results,
It's costing
or
your
the health
life.
costs. So in the end, it'll cost you nothing because you're going to feel better and you're going to take care of your health. So that's a
Right.
question we usually get to once we have our discovery call. I do an initial discovery call with anyone who's interested in working with me so I can find out what they're really after. And then I can tell them about the program, but I always want to see if I'm the right fit, because if I'm not the right fit, I will help that person find another person. It's not about
Right.
the most people. It's about the people that are the right fit that I can provide the most value to.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
And makes sense. And in terms of like finding people,
Mm-hmm.
sounds like you have a pretty big Facebook group. You're active on
Mm-hmm.
Instagram. Is that,
Mm-hmm.
do you think, where most people find you, or is it your local
Um,
community, word of mouth?
It's kind of a combination at this point. I'm pretty active in the local community. I work with a lot of the running clubs, some of the local physical therapists, some of the local doctors' offices. A lot of it at this point is referrals from previous clients, which mean the world to me because that means we, achieve them the results that they wanted.
Yep.
I do get a steady influx from Instagram, I think, because that's where it's just a big platform where folks can be visible. So I do get a lot of interactions from Instagram, a lot of questions that then eventually lead to how do I learn more? Can we work together? So Instagram's definitely a resource, but I'd say it's probably a 50-50 split at this point between local community and referrals and Instagram.
Got it. Very cool. All right,
Yeah.
Kirsten, thank you. I think we covered it all. That was awesome.
Awesome.
And I wish you the best of luck with everything moving forward.
Thank you, Matthew. I appreciate you having me on, and I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah. And this should be out in a couple of days. So just send me all the links to your website,
Okay.
Instagram I have, but anything else that you want me
Yep.
to include in this, I'm gonna do a little write up on you as well.
I love it.
So I'll make sure to include that. All
Awesome.
right.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, of course. All right, everybody. Thank
All right.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.